Imagine being torn from your land, thrown into a cruel exile, where everything you knew seemed to have ended. For many, this would be the end, but not for Ezekiel. Instead of succumbing to despair, he was chosen for a mission that few would understand. How did someone destined to be a priest in Jerusalem become the prophet of a nation in ruins? What did Ezekiel see in the midst of darkness that transformed chaos into purpose? Perhaps it's time for you to also see beyond appearances and discover the power that exists in adversity. If you think you know this story, you're about to be challenged. Ezekiel didn't just bring messages of destruction. He revealed that even in the valley of dry bones, life can rise again. And what does that mean for you? That even in the most desperate moments, there is a promise of renewal. This video will show you how Ezekiel's words have transcended centuries to bring lessons that can still transform lives today. If you're facing challenges, feeling lost, or searching for a new path, get ready. Ezekiel's story will show you that, in the end, there is always hope for those who believe. Ezekiel, the son of a priest, grew up with a responsibility that went beyond the ordinary. Being the son of a priest at that time meant living a life dedicated to faith, surrounded by traditions and rituals that shaped his character from an early age. Imagine a child who, from a young age, observed the preparations for sacrifices, solemn chants, and reverence for the sacred. Everything indicated that he would follow in his father's footsteps, serving in the Temple of Jerusalem. But, as life often surprises us, Ezekiel's plans took an unexpected turn. Before he could complete his training, fate took him far from his homeland. The year was 597 BC, and the Babylonian Empire was in full expansion. Ezekiel, like many of his countrymen, was captured and exiled to Babylon. The impact was devastating. Imagine the frustration of being in a strange place, unable to continue what seemed to be your life's purpose. However, this setback was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something even greater. What he didn't know was that Babylon would become the stage for his transformation. Exile, though painful, set the stage for Ezekiel to receive an even greater mission. Life often places us in unexpected situations, and what seems like a loss may actually be a great opportunity. This is how we should view challenges, as doors to a greater purpose. Who knows, that unexpected job change, that personal life twist, may be exactly what you need to discover your true calling. During his exile in Babylon, at the age of 30, Ezekiel experienced what many would call a true spiritual awakening. Imagine yourself, far from your homeland, your culture, perhaps feeling abandoned and lost. It was precisely at this moment that Ezekiel received his most significant vision, something that would change his life and the destiny of an entire people. The revelation was not just a personal message, but a call to be God's voice to the exiles living by the river Chebar. This vision was so powerful that Ezekiel could not ignore it. It was as if everything that had happened up to that point, his priestly training, the forced exile, the hardships he faced, had been preparing him for that moment. He was called to be a prophet in a time when his people were adrift, without hope, questioning whether God still heard them. Imagine the responsibility, to be the intermediary between the divine and a desperate people, delivering words that could both inspire and challenge. Ezekiel did not hesitate to accept his mission. The revelation he received was so clear that there was no doubt left. Just like him, sometimes we are called to act in moments when everything around us seems to be falling apart. In those moments, what we need most is a vision, clarity about the next step. Perhaps you, like Ezekiel, are also waiting for a revelation in the midst of chaos. The key may be to look within and listen to the call that the moment of crisis brings. Ezekiel's role as a prophet was not easy, especially when he was tasked with delivering a message of destruction. He knew that the road ahead for Israel would be painful. His people, who once walked in harmony with God, had strayed, fallen into idolatry and bad practices. The weight of prophesying the fall of Jerusalem was no small burden. Ezekiel had to warn of the imminent punishment, something that would come at the hands of the Babylonians, the very ones who had already taken them into exile. To Ezekiel, the mission was clear. The people needed to understand that their actions had consequences. The destruction of Jerusalem would be a direct reflection of the idolatry and disobedience that had accumulated over the years. He wasn't just delivering a message of condemnation but also a lesson on how wrong choices could ruin even a nation. How many times in our own lives are we warned about the consequences of our choices, yet we persist in the error? Ezekiel was there as a mirror, reflecting the reality that many did not want to face. Ezekiel also knew that this message would not be popular. No one likes to hear that the end is near, that their failures will be held accountable. Yet, he remained faithful to his mission, showing that sometimes what is most necessary is not what is most pleasant. Perhaps in our own lives, we too need to hear those uncomfortable truths, the ones that make us reflect on our own paths and choices. If you could hear a warning message today, which area of your life would be at risk? Ezekiel didn't just deliver messages with words. He also used symbolic acts to demonstrate the seriousness of what was to come. One of the most striking examples was when he cooked food over human dung, symbolizing the terrible conditions Jerusalem would face during the siege. This was not just a shocking gesture but a visual and visceral way of conveying the suffering awaiting the city. Through his actions, Ezekiel showed that sometimes words are not enough to express the depth of the message. Another impactful example was the use of bricks to illustrate the siege of Jerusalem. He placed a brick on the ground, engraving on it the besieged city, and then surrounded it with miniature troops, graphically portraying Jerusalem's impending fate. Imagine seeing this done in public, a clear and concrete representation of something that had yet to happen. Ezekiel knew that his people needed to see to believe, and symbolic acts created an impact that words alone couldn't achieve. It was a powerful visual strategy that evoked reflection and even fear. These acts were not merely performances but true divine warnings of what was to come. Ezekiel employed a practical pedagogy, where actions spoke louder than words. Similarly, we sometimes need concrete reminders in our lives, something tangible to help us better understand the lessons before us. Perhaps next time you face a problem, consider how to visualize it symbolically. This might help you see the solution more clearly. Despite the harsh visions and messages of destruction, Ezekiel also carried a promise of hope. He prophesied that after judgment, there would be a complete restoration of Israel. God would not abandon his people forever. Just as a potter, even after breaking the vessel, gathers the pieces to mold something new, God promised that Israel would come back to life, stronger and renewed. Ezekiel saw a future where the people's hearts would be transformed, receiving a new spirit, turned towards God's ways. This process of restoration would begin with spiritual purification. For the nation to be renewed, it would need to leave behind the idolatry and wrong choices that had distanced them from God. Ezekiel spoke of a rebirth, a regeneration that involved both the physical and the spiritual. Imagine this in practical terms. For any restoration, whether of a house, a city, or a life, you need to start by clearing the ground, removing what is deteriorated. The same applied to Israel. The restoration, however, would not happen all at once. It would be a gradual process, much like any significant change in life. Ezekiel knew that the people would need patience and faith to witness the complete transformation. It's no different from when we seek a significant change in our personal or professional life. Sometimes the process is slow and painful, but the final result is worth it. And if you're going through a waiting period, perhaps it's precisely the time needed for something new and better to be built. One of Ezekiel's most impressive visions was the Valley of Dry Bones, a desolate scene that represented Israel's total hopelessness. The valley was filled with scattered bones, lifeless, as a clear metaphor for the nation's spiritual and moral state. When God asked Ezekiel to prophesy over these bones, it seemed impossible that anything could rise from there. However, as he spoke, the bones began to come together, gaining flesh and life. This was the power of the prophetic word, bringing life where there was only death. This vision not only symbolized Israel's restoration as a nation but also spoke of the personal and collective renewal that God offered his people. Just as the bones were reconstructed, Israel's hopes and dreams could be restored, even after years of exile and suffering. Imagine the impact of this image on the exiles. A promise that no matter how lost everything seemed, there was still a chance for rebirth. The message was clear. No matter how dry and distant your situation may be, there is always the possibility of new life. The Valley of Dry Bones invites us to reflect on the areas of our lives that may seem hopeless but have the potential to be reborn with the right help. We all go through moments when everything seems stagnant or lost, but just as Ezekiel saw the bones revive, we too can witness transformations when we believe in the process. What in your life today is waiting for a breath of life? Perhaps this is the moment to prophesy over your own dry bones and see the change happen. Ezekiel did not only prophesy about Israel, he was also called to speak against neighboring nations that had taken advantage of Israel's weakness. Egypt, Tyre, and other nations were in the crosshairs of his prophecies, and the message was clear. No one would escape God's judgment. These nations often saw themselves as untouchable, believing that their military strength and wealth would protect them. But Ezekiel brought a warning. The pride of these nations would be their downfall. He described Tyre's destruction, comparing it to a majestic ship sinking into the depths of the ocean. The fall of these nations served as a reminder that no human power could compare to divine power. Even the greatest civilizations would face judgment if they continued on paths of injustice and idolatry. It was a lesson not just for those nations but also for Israel. Pride and self-reliance do not lead to safety, but to ruin. Ezekiel was there to show that God's judgment was impartial. It didn't matter if you were an Israelite or an Egyptian. If you were wrong, judgment would come. These prophecies against neighboring nations also bring a reflection on the arrogance we often cultivate in our own lives. How many times do we think we are invincible, believing that nothing can bring us down? Ezekiel's prophecies are a warning to everyone. Pride comes before the fall. Perhaps it's time to examine areas where we are relying too much on our own strength and ignoring what is truly important. If even the greatest nations can be brought down, what does that say about the need for humility in our lives? Ezekiel concluded his visions with a message that, although focused on the future, brought great hope to the people of Israel. He spoke of the coming of a Messiah, a leader who would unite God's people and bring lasting security and peace. This prophecy, though it may have seemed distant to the exiles of that time, carried with it the promise of final redemption and restoration. The Messiah would be the one to lead Israel to a new beginning, far from the wars and tribulations that had so marked its history. For the exiles, this was the hope that kept faith alive. The image of the Messiah was not just of a political leader, but of someone who would restore the relationship between the people and God. The promise went beyond physical or geographical restoration. Ezekiel envisioned an era where the people's hearts would be completely renewed, free from the idolatry and injustice that had destroyed Israel. Imagine the relief of knowing that even after all the destruction, there was light at the end of the tunnel, a leader who would bring true peace. This messianic hope would be the thread that kept Israel's faith alive through the centuries. The prophecy of the Messiah also serves as a powerful reminder for all of us. In our lives, we often go through moments of destruction or despair, but there is always the promise of something greater, something better to come. Ezekiel's Messiah didn't just point to Israel's future, but to the hope that we all carry in difficult times. What is your messianic hope? Perhaps, like Israel, you are waiting for a leader, a change, or a renewal. Ezekiel's vision encourages us to never give up hoping for better days. Now that you've learned about Ezekiel's fascinating journey, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Ezekiel showed us that even amid chaos and destruction, there is always a greater purpose waiting to be discovered. What areas of your life need restoration? Could it be that, like the dry bones in the valley, there is something you've stopped believing could come back to life? Perhaps this is the moment to act and apply these lessons to your own journey. The prophet Ezekiel not only inspired us with his unshakable faith, but also challenged us to look beyond difficulties and believe that renewal is possible. If you feel like something in your life is stagnant, why not start seeking rebirth today? What will be your next step? Let this story resonate within you, and remember, it's never too late to start again. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's much more to come, and you won't want to miss the next chapters of this journey of learning and transformation.